I remember the day they finally turned on me. It was a Sunday dinner, the kind where the air hung heavy with the smell of roast beef and the unspoken expectations of family loyalty. I sat at the edge of the table, a lonely island in a sea of laughter and clattering silverware, my heart pounding in sync with the ticking clock on the wall. They were all there, my parents, my siblings, laughing, joking, and sharing stories that felt as if they were mocking a ghost who had yet to leave the room. When I finally mustered the courage to speak, to share my latest findings about how the city's rat populations were behaving in increasingly organized and alarming ways, the laughter stopped. My brother Derek looked at me with that familiar mix of pity and contempt. "You've lost it, haven't you? Spent too much time with the vermin, and now you think they're talking to you? Next, you'll tell us they're plotting to take over the city." My cheeks burned with humiliation, and my parents nodded in somber agreement. "You need to get your head straight," my mother said, her voice dripping with concern. "This obsession of yours is unhealthy. You're going to disgrace our family." I tried to explain the patterns I was witnessing, the way these creatures seemed to communicate, almost as if they were orchestrating something far darker than mere survival. But all I received were dismissive waves and condescending smiles. That was the day I realized I would never be accepted back into their world, not while I clung to my passion for paranormal verminology. Years slipped by in a blur of isolation and relentless study. I immersed myself in the shadows of the city, where the whispers of the rats echoed in the dark. I endured the ridicule of the academic community, the disbelief of friends. But I pressed on, driven by a compulsion I could scarcely understand. I began to decode their movements, their murmurs, and soon I stumbled upon something terrifying. An undeniable link between their behavior and a series of unexplained disappearances. I became consumed by my work, a self-proclaimed expert in a field that others deemed absurd. I published papers that turned heads, gained notoriety as the Vermin Whisperer, a title that sent shivers down spines. It wasn't long before the world started to take notice, not of my genius, but of the horrors I uncovered. I became a warning, a living testament to the dangers lurking in the shadows, the truth that others refuse to acknowledge. After years spent unraveling the dark tapestry of the city's vermin-infested underbelly, I returned home. I was no longer the family disgrace, but a figure cloaked in dread, a harbinger of truths they had long dismissed. My heart pounded with a mix of dread and anticipation as I approached the familiar house, now shrouded in twilight. As I stepped over the threshold, the familiar warmth of home felt alien. The walls seemed to whisper. Shadows danced in the corners as I called out, "I'm back." My family appeared, their faces a mix of surprise and unease. They didn't know what to make of me. I was no longer their little brother, their son. I was a vessel of dark knowledge, and I could see it in their eyes, a flicker of recognition, a hint of fear. "Why are you here?" Dad asked, his voice trembling slightly. As I spoke, I could see their disbelief hardening into something far more sinister, fear. And then it happened. The lights flickered, casting eerie shadows across the room. A low, guttural sound reverberated through the walls, and the unmistakable scuttling of tiny feet echoed from the kitchen. I watched as my family's faces twisted in horror, their laughter replaced by a dawning realization of the dark truth I had unearthed. The rats began to pour into the room. A tide of fur and eyes glimmering with an intelligence that sent chills down my spine. My family backed away, their faces drained of color as the horde advanced. I stood rooted to the spot, a mix of dread and exhilaration surging through me. "Do you see?" I shouted over the growing chaos. "They're not just vermin. They know. They understand what you've done, what you've ignored. As my family stumbled backward, the shadows of the rats enveloped them. A writhing mass of fury and desperation. I could see their realization, the horror dawning too late. They had mocked me, belittled my passion, and now they faced the very thing I had tried to warn them about. In that moment, I felt a bittersweet triumph. I had survived the ridicule, the isolation, and now I was no longer the one who had lost their mind. I had become the vessel of a truth too terrible to ignore, and they were finally forced to confront the reality they had shunned. The rats receded as quickly as they had come, leaving my family trembling on the floor, wide-eyed and gasping for breath. I looked at them, a mix of pity and vindication flooding my chest. "I'm not the one who's insane," I whispered, the weight of my journey settling over me like a shroud. "But you'll never forget this moment." As I turned to leave, the door creaked behind me, and I could hear their muffled cries, the echoes of their disbelief haunting the air. I stepped into the night, knowing that I had finally found my place among the shadows, a guardian of secrets hidden beneath the surface of a world unwilling to accept the darkness it harbored. In the end, it wasn't just about the vermin, or the whispers. They were a reflection of all that we refused to acknowledge. And as I walked away, the shadows wrapped around me like an embrace. I knew that I had become more than a mere observer. I had become a part of the darkness itself.